Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a bit different. We're not just analyzing a novel, we're sort of examining an environmental blueprint, really etched in the history of this single beautiful place. We're deep diving into Valli, the monumental Malayalam novel by Sheela Tomy. It's both an epic family saga and, frankly, a severe, undeniable warning rooted in the land of Wynad in Kerala. Our sources help us track this narrative across 4 generations. It kicks off with the first migrant settlers back in the 1970s and brings us right up to the present day. That's a huge scope, isn't it? Chronicling the ecological and social transformation of this fertile, mist-covered region nestled way up in the Western Ghats.
It is. And when you look at the structure Tomy chose, it seems pretty clear she has a specific goal in mind. She's definitely giving us a profound historical record. But importantly, she seems to argue that, well, traditional history on its own isn't quite enough. It can't capture the true soul of a region. And that's why the central insight of this novel is just so powerful. The main character isn't really Tomakan or Sarah or Susan. The protagonist is the land. It's Wynad itself.
Wow. Okay, that immediately shifts the stakes, doesn't it? If the Earth is the protagonist, then the history becomes, well, a story of its suffering, its resilience, its memory.
Exactly. That's the core of it. The novel asserts that the destiny of that specific piece of Earth, its trees, its water, its climate, is completely inextricably linked to the lives of the humans and really every other creature living here. So by tracking the choices made by these 4 generations of people, Valli really functions as this strong, almost prophetic caution. It meticulously illustrates the horrifying consequences, ecological and social destruction playing out in real time.
Okay, before we dive into those generations, because that sounds fascinating, we really have to spend a moment on the title itself, Valli. You mentioned it's key. It feels like an immediate shortcut to the novel's full thematic structure. It's not just one meaning, is it? It's like 4 meanings all coiled together, just like the vine the word literally describes.
It's brilliant. Brilliant linguistic layering.
Yeah.
The author uses that single word to unify the ecological damage, the social history, the personal drama, everything.
Well, let's pull those meanings apart for you, the listener. So on the surface, yes, it literally means creeper or vine. That obviously symbolizes how everything in nature is connected. Then it also signifies land or earth, which grounds the story firmly in the environment. And thirdly, it refers to a young woman, reflecting both the resilience and, sadly, the brutal subjugation of women in the community.
But it's the 4th meaning that's maybe the most devastating. The one that tells you instantly what the social contract, or maybe the lack of one, in Wynad was built upon. Valli was the specific historical term for the rice, the paddy, that was given as wages to bonded laborers, slaves, essentially.
Wow. So when you call the novel Valli, you're simultaneously talking about the rich earth, the intertwining ecosystem, the suffering woman, and the brutal economic exploitation system that literally fed off both the land and the subjugated people.
Yeah. It's the perfect tragic metaphor for the whole Wynad story. The title just symbolizes how ecological degradation and human exploitation are intrinsically bound together. Like a vine, as you said, sometimes supporting but often choking everything in its path.
And the main fictional setting, Valli, seems to embody this duality. It's depicted in the novel as the heartland of Wynad, this place of rich greenery, ancient trees, perpetual mist, nestled in the Western Ghats. It's presented almost like a character itself, but then the narrative just painfully documents its gradual destruction, uncontrolled development, deforestation.
Yeah, and the story isn't delivered in a straight line either. It reaches us through the fractured memory of Susan. She's the daughter of that first migrant generation. She documents her family's life and the history of the land in these diary entries she's writing for her own daughter, Tessa. And these are interwoven with letters, other documents. It's fragmented.
Which really emphasizes the weight of memory, I suppose, and the generational inheritance of maybe guilt and loss.
Exactly. That fractured structure mirrors the fractured land and relationships.
Okay, and connecting all these characters and environments is the Kabani River. What role does the Kabani play in all this?
Oh, it's central. It is the absolute lifeblood of the region. The Kabani nourishes both tribal people who lived there for centuries and the migrant settlers who arrived later. The novel vividly describes its rapid flow, the wildlife that depended on it. But what really drives home the scale of the environmental disaster is the tragic inevitability the author records. The river's slow, agonizing drive. That transition from this life-giving force to just a memory that's completely central to the warning the novelist sounded.
That perfectly sets up our next big theme. How do those 4 generations interact with this living protagonist? the land? Because it sounds like their shifting ideology dictates the scale of the disaster.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
The novel lays out this profound change in values across the generations. If you look at the earliest settlers, people like Tomy and Sarah, who arrived in the 1970s, their initial focus was just pure survival, making a life. They were focused on making the land work, yes, but they achieved prosperity through a kind of synergy. Through hard work, sure, but also through genuine coexistence with the tribal communities. The novel often refers to them quite poetically as the children of the forest.
So it wasn't necessarily some pristine, idyllic relationship, but it was one born out of necessity and knowledge.
Precisely. It was a relationship built on necessary knowledge. This first generation wasn't just clearing land randomly. They possessed this deep, essential understanding of nature. They had to know the annual cycles. You know, when specific trees flowered and shed their leaves, where the bird nests were hidden, the established animal paths, exactly when fish eggs hatched in the Kabani and its tributaries. It was like a rigorous applied science of survival, really, built on a respectful reliance on the ecosystem. Maybe conditional, but respectful.
Okay, so what broke that pact? That necessary connection, the source point of modernity, development. But how did that actually look on the ground in Valli?
Well, the break really started when agriculture shifted. It went from being a means of subsistence of survival to being purely a profit vehicle. The arrival of cash crops, big infrastructure projects, and crucially, speculative real estate and large-scale tourism, that cocktail completely transformed the region's values.
Right. The land stopped being a partner and started being looked at as just an asset, something to be squeezed.
Correct. The later generations began to see land only through the lens of economic exploitation. And that mindset just replaced cooperation with ruthless extraction, which naturally fueled aggressive forest destruction, clearing every available inch for profit, and almost inevitably led to the institutional enslavement and severe oppression of the tribal groups who were either in the way or just seen as cheap labor.
That ideological shift, there's a painful detail the author includes that really sums it up, isn't there, about the younger generation?
Oh yeah, it's heartbreaking. The younger generations who grew up amidst all this environmental devastation, they now find it genuinely difficult to believe that the Wyandotte forest were once permanently cold and mist-covered.
The mist is gone, and the memory of the mist is almost gone too.
It illustrates this deep generational fracture. The environmental crisis is presented here not as some random act of fate, not bad luck, but as the inevitable cascading result of long-term value erosion and just unchecked greed.
Which leads us right into the social core of the novel. Because Valli doesn't treat the indigenous Panya community as, background characters, the novel gives them immense dignity and depth. You have characters like Kilulupan, and it details their profound bond with the forest, their folklore, traditional medicines, specific customs, right down to their unique funeral rites.
Absolutely, and the author made a really powerful intervention here regarding cultural preservation too. So sources note the novel's active effort to phonetically document specific words from the Panya language, which is unscripted directly into the Malayalam script. Now, this is far more than just literary flair, you understand. It's an active commitment to immortalizing the language and therefore the very voices of the marginalized. It's almost an act of justice through literature itself.
But the narrative doesn't shy away from the brutality either. It tackles the systemic social justice themes head-on, the horrific oppression by landlords, the constant land encroachment, destructive state policies that always seem to favor settlers over the native.
And to really drive home the human cost of this cruelty, the novel uses the specific brutal example of the rape and murder of the tribal girl Kai. She becomes this heartbreaking symbol of the cruel exploitation and subjugation faced by the most vulnerable in that society. It shows how the exploitation of the land runs completely parallel to the exploitation of the people tied to it.
But there's resistance, too. To counter that oppression, the author strategically uses local folk culture as a source of strength, right?
Yeah.
We see the inclusion of traditional indigenous songs like the Kakapukulapaku and the harvesting song Lukan.
Yes, and crucially, the novel brings in the myth of Unyaka. She's a Davidasi figure, a temple dancer, who transitions into a goddess. This myth serves as a really powerful symbol within the narrative. It channels the collective struggle for resistance, for resilience, and ultimately liberation, particularly among the oppressed women of the tribal communities.
Okay, so here's where the analysis moves beyond just story and becomes, terrifyingly relevant today. The novel treats nature itself as an active force, a conscious force almost, responding dynamically to human interference. It's not just a passive backdrop. And this led the author into what you called prophetic territory earlier.
It's truly stunning, yeah. What's fascinating here is this striking parallel between the novel's fictional disappearing village, which is called Tambrankunu, and the real-life disaster sites of Churulmala and Mundakai in Kerala. Tomy wrote about villages collapsing due to landslides and floods. She described the patterns of destruction, the unscientific land use, before the devastating 2018 Kerala floods, and the subsequent landslides actually occurred in those very regions.
She saw it coming. She used the historical and contemporary patterns of exploitation, the disregard for water sources, the destruction of the forest canopy to basically map out the future disaster.
It really proves her core thesis. The destruction isn't random, it is predictable. And the tragedy, of course, is amplified by who suffers the most. The narrative reiterates again and again that the ones who bear the brunt of the consequences, the unscientific land use, the deforestation, ignoring critical water streams, it's always the poor daily wage workers and the tribal communities, the people who had the least to gain from the exploitation in the first place, not the wealthy estate owners or the tourism exploiters who actually caused the damage.
So, wrapping this up, what does this novel mean for us? For you, the listener, maybe living far away from Wayanad. This is clearly an epic. It masterfully weaves together deep history, local myths, imagination, and these severe socio-political realities to capture the very soul of a region under existential threat.
And its relevance is deliberately made universal. The author makes a direct thematic connection between the local struggles for land rights among the Panya community in Wayanad and global indigenous movements. Specifically, the sources mention the Maori of New Zealand.
Why that particular comparison? What's the link?
Well, the thematic bridge seems to be the shared fight. The fight against settler narratives, against capitalist exploitation of ancestral land. Whether it's the Panyar fighting encroachment in Kerala, or the Maori fighting for recognition of their unique connection to the land they're winning on. The core conflict is essentially the same. It's this clash between a worldview that values cohabitation, interconnectedness, and one that values purely extractive ownership. Making that link gives the Wayanad story the universal weight it deserves.
And the novel's core environmental philosophy, it's really articulated through that character Basavan, the protector of forest trees. What's the ultimate message he leaves us with?
Basavan's message is, well, it's challenging. It demands a real ecological awareness from us. He says that every human must reach a time when they can hear the cry of the forest. The book argues forcefully for the inherent dignity and preciousness of every single small creature on Earth. It insists that even the most sensitive, smallest plant deserves majesty and respect. It's quite profound.
So the powerful arc of Valli moves us from a story of generational cohabitation, that necessary synergy we were talking about, to this devastating tragedy born of reckless greed and environmental collapse.
Which leaves us with an important question, doesn't it? For you, the listener, to maybe mull over. How often does this powerful pursuit of rapid economic development, usually fueled by short-term gain, turn a place's long, complicated history of survival and coexistence into just another recurring tragedy of ruthless exploitation? Valli is really a testament to the fact that the history of displacement and loss is often written directly in the dried-up riverbeds and the disappeared mist. It's a powerful, urgent demand that we finally start listening to the silence of the dying forests before it's truly too late.